While I was making the Skullgirls video, which by the way is actually really good, and you should go watch it if you haven't already, one moment in one of the many side stories of the whole drama piqued my interest. In the Atrox Chobatsu chat logs, where he's justifying the 2023 censorship of risque content from the 2011 video game Skullgirls in order to update it to modern standards, he makes this point: 2011 was such a different time. What's being said here is that the risque content in Skullgirls, the fan service that it made its name off of, and that people generally appreciated, was acceptable in 2011, but it's no longer acceptable in 2023. I considered making this part of the Skullgirls video proper, but I realized it's actually its own thing, and worthy of discussing in a wider context. This is what terminally online culture warriors call the current year phenomenon. Urban Dictionary defines it as a term often used in a derogatory manner to refer to comments and rebuttals about the current year and the actual or expected state of being for a society. It comes in two forms. The first is, when asked why something is the way it is, the reply given is its current year. So the answer to the question, why is the risque content being removed from Skullgirls, is because it's 2023. The second form of the argument is, when asked why something is being changed, the reply is because the previous year isn't the current year. Same example, why did Skullgirls have risque content in the first place? The answer is because 2011 is not 2023. What's funny about the current year phenomenon is that the actual current year is always changing. This video is being made in 2023, but if you're watching it in, say, 2025, it's going to sound a little bit strange. To you, 2023 isn't the current year. 2023 is in the past, with all of its flaws and controversies, while the current year is 2025. This is why when people mock this idea, they don't actually insert a specific year. They simply say the words current year as a way to slight the people who actually think this way. The heels versus babyface Starfield controversy is a recent noteworthy example of what I'm talking about.
I love nothing more than, with all of that laid out in front of me, I love nothing more than to be dragged out at every fucking conceivable opportunity so you can fucking current day us. Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns! Fucking gender ambiguity! Fucking current day Californian shit! Because that's all we fucking know! Because we're boring! We're so fucking boring!
When people genuinely use this argument, and time marches past the year they've set as the current year, going back and listening to it sounds very strange. The modern version of this meme started with John Oliver back in 2015, where he would regularly talk about the European migrant crisis and respond to the European right-wing's criticism of migration by saying, "Come on people, it's 2015. There's tons of compilations on YouTube making fun of this from back in the day.
If I hear there are a lot of terrorists coming my way, I'm going to be delighted. 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 While each story is unique, many of them are heartbreaking.
Nojin is 16 and from Kobane in Syria.
And so many like her, and so many like her, and so many like her.
Fun fact though, the one clip that everyone uses of John Oliver saying the praise as the main meme.
And it's 2015 right now. Right.
Yeah, that one. The context of it actually isn't John Oliver critiquing the right wing by simply naming the current year. Rather, it's from a segment where he explains that he doesn't want to care about the 2016 presidential election until it's actually 2016.
As I said at the top of the show, it took me almost 30 seconds to say the name Donald Trump. Do you care about him at all?
I couldn't give less of a It's physically impossible. Really? It's physically... You could test... I couldn't care because it's the 2016 election.
Yeah.
And it's 2015 right now.
Right.
So I don't care until we're in the same year as the thing that I'm supposed to care about.
Right.
Presumably, this clip became the go-to for the meme because, even if it's not actually from a segment where John Oliver makes a current year argument, he does make that argument a lot. And it was the cleanest instance of him saying the words, "It's 2015" from an audio perspective. John Oliver saying it's 2015 as a criticism of the right is one half of why current year became a meme. The other half is the Canadian Prime Minister, the hyper-progressive Justin Trudeau, saying the same thing in the same year.
Your cabinet, you said, looks a lot like Canada, and I understand one of the priorities for you was to have a cabinet that was gender balanced. Why was that so important to you?
Because it's 2015.
Both Trudeau and Oliver approached the topic with the same progressive smugness, which is probably why mocking it became so popular. And listening to these clips in 2023, it sounds strange, doesn't it? Just like to our future viewer, it's not 2023 anymore, it's 2025. To us, it's not 2015, it's 2023. What makes 2015 so special that simply uttering its name was considered a coherent argument? Remember earlier I said the current year argument takes two forms. The first is to justify the current state of affairs by saying it's the current year. The second is to justify a change by saying the previous year's standard was problematic. But it's not hard to find examples of a year being considered both problematic and modern, and once you do that, everything starts to fall apart. Here's an article from a month ago, where the voice actress for Quiet from Metal Gear Solid 5, Stephanie Houston, voices her disapproval for Quiet's revealing attire during the game. She specifically said, "This game came out in 2015, and I think the video game landscape has changed quite a lot since then. People are looking for more representation, and I really get it." For those of you who don't know, from the initial reveal of Quiet during, I think, an E3 2013 presentation, up until the game's launch in 2015, feminists online were blasting her character design for being objectifying and degrading towards women. The few religious boomers who were still talking about video games agreed with them in their own way, saying they were corrupting the youth. Meanwhile, it was a coalition of normal, unaligned gamers, smug, fedora-tipping Reddit liberals, and the few sex-positive feminists that existed back then coming together to say no, it's actually fine to have an attractive woman with her tits out. Stop acting like a Puritan. But with regards to her portrayal of Quiet, Houston is using a current year argument. Metal Gear Solid 5 came out in 2015, it's now 2023. Standards have changed in the past 7 years. What was good is now bad, including, by the way, her initial defense of it. Houston gave an interview in April of 2015 on Yongye's channel, never thought I'd say his name again, where she says that she's not bothered by Quiet's outfit.
A lot of people took notice of Quiet's attire, or lack thereof, some would say. Were you nervous about the character, how she would be received as a result of how she of what she's wearing, and what kind of feedback did you get after Quiet was unveiled?
Well, I was really expecting there to be this kind of reaction there was.
Sure.
Well, lots of controversy. Because of course, when I got to see her design at first, I was shocked too.
Right.
So I was, because especially since everybody didn't get to hear her story yet. So
Right.
I can understand people are angry about it or saying she's showing too much.
Right.
But I'm not bothered by it.
Here's what's so funny to me. If we're to listen to, say, John Oliver or Justin Trudeau, 2015 was an era of progressive morality. They were making explicitly progressive proclamations and justifying them by simply saying, it's 2015. Of course this is what we're doing. In that context, suddenly seeing 2015 used as an exclamation of a past era where things were not progressive. In fact, they were the regressive dark ages that we've thankfully moved past. The cognitive dissonance starts to come into focus. Here's another example going back even further. I used this on a weekly sip a few months ago, but I think it actually works better than the Quiet example. Eddie Murphy's two blowout stand-up comedy specials of the 1980s, Delirious in 1983 and Raw in 1987, contained tons of homophobic slurs and remarks, stereotypes about gay people's sexual practices, stereotypes about AIDS. It was fucking brutal. But they were also hilarious, and they're considered some of the best stand-up comedy sets of all time. In 1996, the San Francisco news website SFGate, yes, Zoomers, the internet existed in 1996, published an article titled, "After 15 Years, Actor Apologizes for Gay Slurs." Gay activists at the time were demanding that Eddie Murphy's appearance in The Late Show with David Letterman be cancelled because of his homophobic remarks from a decade ago. In response, Murphy released a public statement saying, "Just like the rest of the world, I am more educated about AIDS in 1996 than I was in 1981. I think it's unfair to take the words of a misinformed 21-year-old and apply them to an informed 35-year-old man. I know how serious an issue AIDS is the world over. I know AIDS isn't funny. It's 1996, and I'm a lot smarter about AIDS now." This is a current year argument. Only now, the current year in question, the peak of modern progressive morality, is 1996, and the regressive dark ages is 1981. Do you think that progressives nowadays believe 1996 was a peak of modern progressive morality? We all know they don't. They go to great lengths to talk about how the 90s sucked and was full of bigotry every chance they get. Kinda like how Oliver and Trudeau and Houston were pro-2015 until 2015 became the past. Now they're anti-2015. Oh, also, unlike modern progressive activists, back in 1996, activists actually accepted Murphy's apology. Progressive activists nowadays tend to just want people to be cancelled forever. And in fact, modern progressives still occasionally dredge this shit back up to demand Eddie Murphy be cancelled yet again. So what's going on here? There's two separate things: the logic of the current year argument and the people employing the current year argument. Let's start with the logic first. What a current year argument appeals to is the idea of morality changing over time. Yeah, I can hear you saying right now, no shit, Dev, but just let me explain it. If somebody were to say the phrase, black people shouldn't be allowed to vote in 2023, it would be reasonable to look at that person strangely and to consider what he says to be immoral and offensive. But if he were to say that phrase back in 1963, 2 years before the Voting Rights Act of 1965, you would find it to be a reasonably popular position. Even if we consider it immoral today, even if we would have been a part of that segment of the population that considered it immoral back then, there was a decent chunk of the American public that agreed with it. The general morality of our culture has changed from then to now, and talking about the current year is a shorthand way of referencing that moral change. Now, imagine an argument between somebody who genuinely believes that black people shouldn't be allowed to vote in 2023 and someone who disagrees. Assuming they were both reasonable people and it didn't come to violence, it would probably go something like this. Person A says, I don't think black people should be allowed to vote. Person B says, that's fucking stupid. Person A says, that's an ad hominem. You're attacking me as a person, not actually presenting a counter-argument as to why black people should be allowed to vote. Person B would then say, because it's 2023. When person B brings up the current year, they're not actually making a literal claim that the calendar year somehow influences what moral code we should follow. It's 2023 is shorthand for, your position is so stupid, so indefensible in the face of the evidence that humanity has managed to collect over the years on this topic, that by merely stating it, you have demonstrated that you lack the ability to understand any rational argument I could give you in response. It's like saying, I don't think gravity exists, or I think the earth is flat. What's really interesting about this logic is that when Justin Trudeau used it, it was actually exactly what he should have said from his position. Justin Trudeau ran his 2015 campaign with a promise of gender parity in his cabinet. He could have very easily responded to that reporter's question with, well, I ran my campaign with a promise of gender parity in my cabinet. I was elected with a majority government. Very clearly the people want me to do this. It's popular and it's immoral. Those few people who disagree with me are not only immoral but unpopular. Therefore, you should direct your question to them. But that doesn't have the makings of a viral soundbite. The phrase, it's 2015, wraps all of that logic up into just a few seconds. A lot of the initial criticisms of the current year meme were therefore criticisms of progressive smugness. Progressives back then didn't feel the need to explain this logic. They simply presented it as fact in the most condescending way possible, making it seem like those who questioned their ideas were simply low IQ, backwards, regressive troglodytes that could be dismissed out of hand. Making fun of current yearisms is entertaining, but it also doesn't refute their logic. Shitting on Trudeau for saying it's 2015 isn't the same thing as actually examining his 2015 cabinet picks and analyzing them for any deficiencies. And if he actually did that and found glaring problems, his smug statement immediately deflates. His exclamation of "it's 2015" now sounds like he's wholly out of touch. However, it's not 2015 anymore. Nowadays, a lot of people don't actually pack in all of that logic into the usage of current year. They simply exclaim it's the current year without thinking and then leave it at that. Like here, I see this sentiment a lot. It's 2023. Why doesn't America have universal healthcare? I think America should, by the way, but what underlying logic is beneath the use of 2023 here? What's beneath the hood? The answer is a belief in unyielding progress, that things should get better over time, will get better over time. It's simply the natural way of the world, and those who impede this march are the enemies of a universal humanity. Explaining this mindset, what it gets right and what it gets wrong, is too big of a topic for this video, but most people who invoke the current year think like this. As time marches on, things should get better. And by better, they mean more progressive. And by more progressive, they mean whatever it is that they prefer in the current moment. Which leads us to the other half of the argument, the people employing the current year logic. Justin, at 35 years old, came out against how quiet was dressed. She defended it back when she was 27. Mariel Cartwright from the Skullgirls video. She was in her early 20s when she defended her sexual expression through her artwork as being sex positive and progressive and authentically her. She was in her mid-30s when she decided that old artwork needed to be censored. This is, once again, the instance of Ego Raptor pulling the ladder up behind him, using slurs when he was younger and edgier to establish a career, and then shitting on people who now use slurs because he's older and tamer and more established. Some feedback that I received in the Skullgirls video made the argument that this is just the normal aging process. We do know that psychologically, when you're young, you're in the exploratory phase of your life. People tend to spend this time exploring radical ideas, or visiting new locations, or enjoying varied romantic partners. But once you're a bit older, in your 30s and your 40s, the exploratory period is over. you've largely settled into who you're going to be, and what exists beyond the bounds of your society is generally viewed as less appealing as it did when you were younger. Most people tend to stop enjoying edgy humor or overt sexuality or novel experiences as they get older. And when older people do enjoy those things again, they often remark about how young they feel when they do it. So yeah, some of this is just maturing. But with maturation should come wisdom. These people should know that even if sexual content or edgy humor or whatever else is no longer to their taste, there's a new crop of young people coming up who are in the prime of their exploratory phase, who are going to enjoy it just as they did. But instead of that understanding, we simply see repression. Just as the parents of millennials view Dungeons & Dragons and video games and modern music as degenerate and destroying America's children, the parents of Zoomers view anti-LGBT acceptance or edgy jokes about progressive politics as evidence that fascism is in full bloom once again. This is different language used to describe the same psychological process. Young people are bad because they're doing stuff that I find to be morally reprehensible, even though when I was their age, I did stuff that older people found to be morally reprehensible. It's not just maturing. If it were, they'd be able to see what's going on here more objectively. It's the belief that the aforementioned march of progress also includes them on a personal level. If progressivism means that things should get better over time, then as progressive people, whatever moral changes they go through over time is necessarily getting better, even if that effect is inconsistent between individuals or generations. A millennial progressive who was born in 1990, at 20 years old in 2010, probably believed that being edgy and sexual and irreverent towards authority was progressive activism, because that's what the exploratory phase feels like when filtered through progressivism. That same person, as a 33-year-old progressive in 2023, likely feels that what progressivism is now is stamping out problematic behavior through censorship, social shaming, maybe even deplatforming or canceling, because they've moved out of the exploratory phase of their lives. And now their psychology is calling for stability, not exploration. In other words, the normal maturation process has become hijacked by the ideology, and as the progressive progresses through life, what they view as the proper progressive politics will shift in order to match their own life's era. This also explains why these people tend to use previous years as an insult. You see it a lot. People will say that the Gamergate man-babies are stuck in 2014. Anti-immigration activists in Britain are stuck in 2015. Trump fans are stuck in 2016. I was recently told that I was stuck in 2018. They regularly fail to recognize that the same logic applies to them. People who are still screaming about COVID are stuck in 2020. People who complain about the neocons or the religious right are stuck in fucking 2008. But more importantly, there's a baked-in assumption that newer is better, more modern, more progressive, more moral, and that if you haven't caught up to the current standard, you're somehow inferior, even if the current standard is actually worse than the previous one. When a person like this says, it's the current year, what they're basically saying is that they had a utopian expectation of where society should be by the time they grew up. And now that they've grown up and realized we're not there, and in many cases will never be there, they're bitter. Sometimes that bitterness drives them towards more extreme politics, in a desperate attempt to bring about that utopia. Sometimes it leads them to stagnating or regressing in life, believing that if the future only arrives when they're an adult, and the future isn't here yet, then they have to still be young, even if they're actually just a 40-year-old man-baby. And sometimes they just stop being progressives. In any case, a lot of modern progressivism is a refusal to deal with the world as it is, and most current year arguments are basically the speaker voicing their frustration that their life hasn't turned out the way they wanted it to, and that it's everyone else's fault. Probably the most pure, blatant, mask-off version of this logic is Movie Bob's Twitter feed. I am genuinely convinced that what he's saying openly is what simmers under the surface of every radicalized, bitter utopian. We'd all be better off recognizing that just because time marches on, whatever it brings is not automatically going to be good. That progress looks differently to different people, because to progress means to move towards a goal. And if different people have different goals, then movement will look very different from each point of view. Sometimes we do luck out and discover a new way that is just blanket better than the previous. But for most things, change is not automatically good. Progress is not automatically good. Option B is not a blanket upgrade from option A. It simply has different positives and negatives that we need to weigh, and everyone will come to a different answer based on their own interests. Here's an example of what I mean. Is the world better now that we can order anything we like off of Amazon? I mean, yeah, that's progress. I can now pay less money to get a toolkit delivered to my house than it cost me 30 years ago to go out and buy a less advanced version of those same tools. That is 100% an improvement of my material conditions as a working class guy. Looking at this in terms of progress, the new way is better than the old, simple as. But is it really? What's been lost that I'm not considering? I no longer have to ask my neighbor to borrow his tools. That's less humiliating for me and less annoying for him. But now I also have one less material reason to maintain a relationship with him. Close-knit communities are partially based on material need, where relationships are maintained because that guy is your toolkit, and that guy can fix your car, and in return, you babysit their kids or you tutor them or something. Increased economic productiveness has brought about the disintegration of close-knit communities because relationships of necessity are no longer necessary. Is this good? I don't know. It might actually be better this way, but it is a trade-off. We gained something, more access to material goods, but we also lost something, a close-knit community. And to simply declare that because it's newer, it is therefore blanket better is stupid. When I made my Nostalgia as Fascism video, I also discussed this idea. Things are not simply better because they're new, and things were not bad simply because they were old. The reason you see attempts online to discredit the past is because progressive ideology demands it. The future must be better, therefore the past must be worse, and anything from the past that could have been better, even if only to some people, has to be erased. The radical has to make it so that their new regime is the only regime, even throughout history. This is why Islamists destroy Buddhist monuments, communists restart the calendar at the new Year Zero, progressives tear down statues of America's founding fathers, and Nazis burn books. And yes, although it's at a much smaller scale, the same psychological impulse is why people censor old, edgy content in video games because their current politics doesn't approve of them. What motivates all of this is a belief that the current year is the enlightened utopia. The previous year is the regressive dark age. And when time marches on, the calendar flips over, what was once the enlightened utopia will become the regressive dark age, even if nothing's actually changed. Even if things have gotten worse, because the only time that exists for these people is right now. In replacing tradition with progress, they've replaced a continuum that stretches across the ages in both directions, of which they are only a small part, with a single moment centered on them, existing eternally, right up until the final second before reality comes crashing down.